Hi, everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome Dina Pina, who's joining us from the land of Israel today. I'm super grateful for you to come. Dina, in our little WhatsApp, I often refer to you as the Rabbi. You are a Rabbi of all descriptions and all types, and I'm very grateful to have you as a friend for lots of years, somebody who's guided me. Welcome. Tell us 2 words about you.
Hello, Oliver. What an honor to be. I definitely can't live up to that. I am here in snowy Jerusalem, and in my real life, I teach in Hebrew youth, and I'm originally from London. What else can I tell you? And I have just finished my MA in creative writing.
Oh,
Focus on poetry.
Shkoyach. So we're talking about. It's so lovely to talk to you about Parshat. We've just had a chat about what on earth we're going to talk about between Parshat Terumah and Purim coming up next week on Thursday night, Friday. We're going to try and do it, the transition between the two. In Parshat Terumah, we have the story of the building of the Mishkan, which is the mobile sanctuary which the Jews lug around the desert. And I guess in my mind, and we had a lot of kind of backwards and forwards on this, in my mind, the Mishkan, well, not in any way radically, the Mishkan is a mobile sanctuary, which then becomes the temple in more modern times, which then becomes the Beit Midrash, the house of study, or the synagogue. And we were talking about the place of physical space in our religious community, in our religious lives. You had some interesting words on that in relation to that now these virtual times of living in Corona.
Right, I'm very interested. I'm interested in two different aspects. Although as you were talking about how it's the mobile sanctuary, I often wonder how they lugged it around the desert for all those years. It must be very heavy. So yes, I have the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is described as a resting place for God's presence. And I wonder what that means. I wonder what that means in these times of Corona, of where God's presence now rests, now that my synagogue now that my place of meeting and my house of study are both closed. What does that mean? Where does that mean that I find God's presence? And what I also asked as an opposite side to that question is, where do I go if I'm not interested in meeting God? If I'm not interested in, if the tabernacle is a resting place for God's presence, and that has been translated into my synagogue and my house of learning, what do I do if I want to engage with my synagogue and my house of learning, but I'm not interested in God's presence? So I think there are two sides to this question that I've been thinking about a lot during these Corona times.
Can I bounce it back at you and say, like, how do you personally connect to that story? Like, is there a place that you find God, or is there or are you entirely uninterested in finding that space?
It's an excellent question. I think that there's a joke told about I'm formerly religious. That means I grew up religious, and today I essentially live a secular life. And there's a joke that's told about us that we want to go to our secular synagogue. We want a synagogue, but we want it to be secular. And I think there is something missing when we don't have a Beit Knesset, a place of gathering. There is something missing. And I think, and a lot of people talk about it now. A lot of people talk about it during Corona. They really are missing that place of gathering. And of course, lots of Orthodox women have then said, welcome to our lives. You know, we aren't encouraged to come consistently to synagogue. And that's our lives. we miss it. We want it. We want this place of gathering.
Is there a place that you could picture or search out that God, or is that not a quest that you're?
Is that not a quest that I'm on?
Is that not a question? No, I'm genuinely asking.
I think that look, I think that's why I live in Jerusalem. I think that in Jerusalem it's very difficult to avoid spirituality, not necessarily in a religious sense. It's just we're a subdued city, and we're a very modest city. People are modest. I don't mean in terms of dress. I mean in the way that they live. We're not very flashy. The things that we value are very, are the understated places, and the things that we enjoy. What? Yes,
not
exactly. Exactly. We've suddenly got all these high rises, and everybody's up in arms because we are understated. We're a little bit slower than other places. We're a little bit, and there's something about that where one cannot help but encounter the spiritual.
So the way that we transition to Megillat Esther, which is the scroll that we read on Purim, was by way of this differential between Terumah, which is about building the Mishkan, this physical space in the desert, where the indwelling of God, whatever that means, where the dwelling of God comes down and sits with the people, v'shachanti b'tocham, and in Megillat Esther, there's something about the essence is inversion, is about bringing down the wicked Haman, about the lowly classic Jew of Mordechai being lifted up. But it seems to be, at least in one of the Hasidic teachings, which we spoke to briefly, it seems to be that one of the lessons of Purim, which probably relates also partly to Hanukkah, is the possibility that we might overturn wickedness in the world. So in relationship to, in my imagination, in relationship to Terumah, which is about building something, Megillah then becomes about bringing down evil in order to enable a better world or facilitate the deliverance of a better world. And I also wonder how you relate to that kind of clumsy transition between the two.
Well, it's also, as you were talking, I realized it's also literally the opposite. If Terumah is all about the resting, if the Mishkan is all about the resting place of God and of God's presence, and if the Mishkan is all about God's presence, the Megillah is literally not about God in any way at all. God literally doesn't take God's place anywhere in the Megillah. And I think
God's name is not mentioned.
Right. And I think that's also an interesting juxtaposition between the two. I'm interested in. I've been interested recently in what does defeating evil mean? I don't really know what it means. I'm also interested in who is evil. I mean, halachically, I know who is evil in the Purim story. I know who the Jewish tradition says is evil, but I can't help feeling that there is something. I can't help feeling that Achashverosh gets off very lightly. He doesn't lose his position. He doesn't lose anything. And I can't help feeling that there's something very contemporary about that, about this man who facilitates really evil, and yet he carries on as king. He doesn't lose anything. There are no repercussions whatsoever. I mean, he lets people off tax, which is very nice. But he personally loses nothing, and I've started to become interested in that.
Right. So then in that mold, you have this wonderful story of Ma'apecha, of like total inversion and total revolution in the story, and yet at the very central point of the story, you have this character who literally goes like this at the end and says, "Well, that was a nice story," and carries on his kingly reign. Yeah. I guess in this context, we have to wrap up. And my only thing to say is we will have you back and study more Parsha together. I was really interested when we spoke about your words in relation to evil and in relation to evil here being specific threat to life. And one of the things we spoke about earlier is that everything else in some guise or another is gray area. And you suggested that we have to be careful in that gray area not to point and say that's evil. And that seems to be a very pertinent lesson to this generation, that you can't simply turn around to the person next to you and say evil and then expect to entirely oppose everything that person represents. That seems to be an important lesson also for Purim this year. You can have the final word, Dina, and then we'll stop.
Oh, I don't know what the final word is. I really don't know what the final word is, because we seem to be in the middle. We seem to be so much in the middle of this. I don't know what the final word is. I don't know how to wrap anything up, because we are so in the middle of this historic, awful time that I don't know, and I don't know how to wrap anything up. But this whole year, I've not known how to wrap anything up, because the only thing to say is stay healthy, and if you can't keep the ones who are closest to you in physical proximity, then I hope that you can keep them in your emotional proximity.
Thanks, Dina.